Welcome, everyone, to Paranormal Roundtable. I'm your host, Josh Turner, also known as Wolf, and with me always is...
Sal Capone. Sal Recian. Or just plain Sal.
Well, Salmonella.
That too. I can be. You know, be a little bit poisonous to people, you know.
You grow on people, though.
Oh, yes.
Like ragweed.
Oh, no. More like penicillin, or, you know, it's like you
you're
see
not
on the
a cure
pizza.
for anything. You're just
No. The bad
poison.
kind of
You're
penicillin.
Poison. Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, the bad kind of penicillin that if you
just
eat
mold.
it. Yeah, exactly.
It's just mold.
Exactly. You'll be a moldy kind of guy.
We had a bunch of people sending us emails about what we were going to call you because you were playing off that Sal thing, but I don't think it's going to work. The Salad Czar.
Oh, yeah. There's plenty of them out there. Yeah.
I mean, can I ask you a question? Because I haven't even asked this. How did you even get that nickname? Because that's just the first three letters of your last name.
Because,
it'd be like calling me Tur.
Well, as far as, it would be simple. Just Josh Turner. Well, I did time in, the Army. And, of course, when your name tends to be a mouthful, it's easy. Sal. Or people that are like McGee, McFarland, any of those names that start with a Mac, McDonald, just call them Mac because it's that easy.
Mm-hmm.
It when you can simplify it, you simplify it.
Especially if it's I know that, but still,
that's it. That's
why did they just call you Mondo?
Because that's not how it goes.
That's just not how it goes.
That's how it goes in the military.
Yeah, I know because it's the last name.
Yeah, it is. And so just Sal. I just stuck with all my Army buddies. It was. But
I'm surprised nobody called because they could just say Turn.
They could. It all depends on what it
makes any sense.
It all depends. Who knows? But hey, anyways, everybody, we got a great guest today. Now, you want to give them the email there, Wolf?
Yeah, dotswolfman88@gmail.com and
wolfandsal@gmail.com. Send us your stories, folks. We want to hear them. We want to know all about it. We're going to get to them as fast as we can. We're doing the best we can. So guess what? Folks, it may take some time, and we apologize in advance for all that. But thank you for sending us your stories. Please keep sending them. And with that being said, let's move on to our guest today. Wolf, you've been telling me about this all week. Hey, we got a great guest on today. So, hey, do the honors and introduce our guest.
Her name is Melissa Martell. Melissa, you want to say hi?
Hey, everyone. How's it going?
I'm stoked. I'm stoked. So, give us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah,
Melissa.
tell us about yourself. You have a podcast called The Secret Door Podcast.
I do. I just started out on my own a couple of months ago. So it was sort of been a long journey to podcasting on my own. I started writing and creating e-zines because I'm a graphic designer with a group called The Curious 14, and I wrote online blogs for them. And then I founded a podcast called the Folklore Podcast, but I was behind the scenes doing the website stuff and making magazines about folklore. And that did really well. Parted ways from that and then decided to create a podcast of my own with a podcast partner. And it was about a year and parted ways for a variety of different reasons. And I thought, you know what? I could just do it by myself. I did everything anyways on the other podcast. So I've got this. So I'll just do my own. So I've just recently started my own, which is the Secret Door Podcast. And Here I am on your show.
Nice. Well, for all of you folks out there, the Secret Door Podcast, because, hey, when you desire anything and all things paranormal, well, I'm sure, the Secret Door can accommodate, whatever you like, unless you're genre specific there, Melissa. Are you genre specific?
Well, I'm not. I like to talk about the paranormal and the occult a lot.
Nice.
But because, I just had someone come on and talk about UFOs. So I'm open, even though I specifically talk about occult and magic and paranormal. I don't mind to venture around that. That's why I didn't call the podcast like the Alien Door. So,
that's
something
great.
like that, right? That's why I tried to keep it broader.
Yeah. You've got kindred spirits with us over here because we entertain the whole paranormal, the scope of it, and even to the other things that people get into talking about. We even entertain all that stuff, because at the end of the day, for us, we are trying to just get the information out to people. Let them come to their own conclusions. Let them find the threads within what we're putting out, because that's what we do when we research and we tell the stories. For example, the stories about people's encounters with these cryptid creatures out there, whether it be Dogman, Sasquatch, you name it. We listen, we get the stories, we tell them, but when we read these stories and stuff, we're always seeing if there's a thread. And we talked about it in an earlier show when we interviewed King Gerhard, and we were mentioning, I believe, yes, it was, Wolf mentioned pterodactyl sightings, flying pterodactyl sightings. And he said, well, the first time he got one of those, okay, this is very unusual. He grabbed it, read it, and then put it up, like, for example, or for lack of better words, put it up on the shelf, left it alone until he came across more. And then, of course, that's when, those things, kind of all lined up. And that's when we really start paying even closer attention. I mean, we pay attention to what we get, but we pay even more attention when it comes to situations such as that. So that's the way we operate. And obviously, it sounds like you do a lot of what we do, and we do what you do, and we're kindred spirits.
Exactly. One of the things I like to talk about too often is like cult leaders, and point out in the media or people online or online cult leaders. I like to point that out continuously in my stuff, because I like people to know and be aware, because there's actually a lot more cults out there than you think, and they're troublesome to me. So I do that a lot as well.
That's funny, because one of the ladies that I work with is that she's into the paranormal, but she's also into studying cults. And she just told us that like Friday.
Oh,
no.
Yeah, that's funny.
I have a show coming out this coming week, Friday, on Jared Leto. The Cult of Jared Leto. I don't know if you guys seen that. You should look that up. He's got some creepy stuff going on, the actor.
Well, he's a weird looking guy.
Yeah, he's a weirdo anyways.
Well, you should read about his creepy cult. It's on an island off of Croatia, and it's creepy.
He's weird looking. I mean,
well, if you stop and think about in the movie, in that horrible movie that they call The Suicide Squad.
Oh gosh.
The way he dressed up as the Joker, and to me in that movie, I think that's the perfect expression of this cult that's what's coming to mind to me, that this perfect expression of his cult.
Yeah, that, and like, did you see him in Blade Runner?
The new one?
Yeah.
Yes.
I was like, you know what? I think he took that role really serious. But I think this has been happening because he's doing it through the band. They have a band. Him and his brother have a band, like something Seconds to Mars or something.
30 Seconds to Mars?
Had that, 30 Seconds to Mars. Thank you. They've had that band since '98. So I think they've been building this for a while, and we're just hearing about it now.
He was in a weird movie, a Japanese movie. I don't remember the name of it.
Well, I'm not a big Jared Leto, whatever his name is. I'm not a big fan of his work. I mean, if he does a good movie, great, but he's not somebody I pay attention to. So, but at the same time, being the follower of a celebrity such as an actor, to me, it's completely. I find it comical.
What was the movie called, Tony? Outsider. That was the
interesting
movie. Yeah, where they cut his finger off because he's a part of a Yakuza.
Oh yes, I remember that movie. Now I did see it though.
Weird stuff in that movie. It wasn't a bad movie, but that's the only movie I've ever seen him in that I liked him. But anyways, moving on from that weird guy.
Yeah, I liked him in Lord of War. I liked that movie because there was Nicolas Cage in there too. So
Oh, I've never seen that.
Lord of War. You got to see it.
Check that out.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's one of the weird. Wow, what other internet cults have you found out about? I mean, I don't want to ruin the show for you.
We talked about that John of God fellow.
Say that one again. What's his name again?
John of God.
John of God.
Have you heard of him?
No, I guess I'm gonna have to check it out.
He was just last year arrested because he was running like you come there and get cured by John of God. He was promoted by Oprah Winfrey. Tons of celebrities were going there, and they were getting like these fake operation healing processes. Well, he was arrested, and what it looks like he was doing was he was literally running a human trafficking farm. He was young girls would go to his compound that he was running there, and he would keep them, enslave them, and impregnate all of them, beat them, and sell their babies on the black market. And there tons of abuse and possibly even murder. And he was arrested, and he was heavily promoted by Oprah Winfrey and a whole bunch of other celebrities.
Makes you wonder about Oprah, doesn't it?
Yeah. She's probably a cult in and of herself.
Quite possibly. There are those people out there that worship her, and
but she
amazing.
hasn't, to my knowledge, isolated anybody in a compound or an island yet.
Well, we had there's that guy that supposedly committed suicide, and Jeffrey Epstein. There's that guy. Woo.
Oh yeah, the Epstein Island. They get you in islands, or what they do is they get places outside of your country, and they lure you away from where you're protected by law. So they'll lure you to South America, Jonestown. They'll lure you to like an island outside of Croatia, or someplace where they'll isolate you from the rest of society.
Ron Hubbard comes to mind.
Yeah.
Yes.
They were throwing people off the ship, I heard, like in international waters.
I believe it. It's so hard to prosecute anybody
and they couldn't do nothing about it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just,
And if you're in international waters and then being the captain of a ship, there's that old saying. They say that they're pretty much God.
Not to brag, but I was recruited by the Dianetics people. I had high thetan levels, as they say, or some weird stuff, or ghosts in your blood, or something. I don't know what it is.
That's the premise of cults: is the leader is a god, presents himself as the answer to all your spiritual questions, and they'll always be like, they'll say they're reborn as Jesus, or they're a godlike character. Jared Leto, he's pretending he's Jesus basically, and his followers, being probably severely codependent, are reinforcing that godlike fantasy he's got.
Yes, they're enabling him to carry on that delusion.
What a weird looking deity. He's a weird looking dude.
Yeah. Well, he's in all these white robes, and all his followers are in white. It's just creepy.
It reminds me of one. I'm fairly certain you've probably heard of it, Melissa. There's this one Hispanic guy down in Florida that claims he is Jesus Christ. And,
which one? There's a new one every week.
Well, this guy made news. This guy made the news, and I'm trying to remember.
There's a bunch of them making the news.
Well,
Jesus.
Well, he was selling himself.
Guy,
he
dude.
was. Well, he was selling himself as Jesus to his congregation, and then, of course, even after he was exposed, for lack of better words, and he was interviewed by the media, he still insisted that he was Jesus, and that he was performing miracles. So,
even after it was scientifically proven that he did not get crucified on the cross,
all that stuff, he was claiming he was Jesus reborn, and et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, you've probably got hundreds upon hundreds of these cults, and I'm sure you focus on mainly the ones that have the hardest or the most or the biggest impact, I guess would say.
Well, I have we focused on that conspiracy theorist crazy guy David Wilcock one time, because we think I interviewed somebody, and they it all looks good when they're on the stage, but it's what they do is you don't see the cult and the abuse if you're outside on the stage. It's the inner circles, the people they get closer to them, that they really abuse. So he was talking about that because he had been exposed to it. And another thing I have coming out at the end of September is I have some ladies. I cannot say the name of the cult leader, but he's operating online now, and they're involved in a criminal investigation and a whole bunch of stuff with this online guy. He's on YouTube, and it's pretty intense. He's been doing this for a couple of decades, writing books and stalking and getting people to embezzling money and lying about his credentials. And he's fooled a lot of people. And they came on my show, and we had a conversation about him. And I didn't really want to say who it was, because I didn't really want, he'll probably figure it out. So if I get his little flying monkeys after me, I won't be surprised. But yeah, I had a couple ladies coming on, and he's probably got about 25,000 followers on YouTube. So it's not massively huge, but it's enough. It's enough. It's I have a lot more followers than I have.
Is he showing, I mean, I guess you could say, is he displaying all the signs of a cult leader, the classic signs?
he's displaying a lot of them. He doesn't have an island or whatever, but you don't necessarily need to get people on an island somewhere. You can call them. You can call them on the internet and have them. A chat room can be your island, right?
Yes.
What was that guy's name? Applewhite or whatever?
Yeah.
And
old
God, it was crazy. They castrated themselves. Like, it was ridiculous, dude.
Heaven's Gate looking
Heaven's
kind of guy.
Gate, yeah. Well, I guess when you're that low testosterone, you don't mind castrating yourself. You might as well.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that there are people out there who are looking for someone to, or inclined to want someone to lord over them. I'm one of those that promotes you've got to think for yourself.
Oh,
because
there's a lot of people want to give their rights away now.
Yeah.
They don't care.
And it's scary. It's scary that people think that way. But again, it's a mindset, and many people forget that you are the master of your own decisions. And when they leave a decision, or they take the mindset that, hey, whatever this person says is gold. So if they place that mindset upon themselves, or never really think past it, yeah, it's sad. It's just sad.
A lot of these people that are following them are, number one, obviously they don't feel empowered themselves, and they feel like any kind of connection with this leader makes them special. They're actually out there looking for something that makes them special, and these cults and religions offer them elite special status, and it's whatever it is, whether they had a dysfunctional childhood or they just always had low self-esteem, however they develop their codependency, they're looking for this elite feeling, and they don't think they can create it themselves because it's unrealistic. We could never feel that way all the time as human beings, and they don't understand what it is. Obviously, they don't like being human, and they're looking for this almost addictive, high sense of elite, special feeling. And what they end up getting is recycled, spit in, spit out, abused, and treated like crap. Because they literally give up their own personal sovereignty.
Yeah, it's reminiscent to. This brings to mind the relationship between the pimp and the prostitute. If a pimp is trying to bring a prostitute into his harem, he will wine and dine her or however the case may be, whether the prostitute is male or female, irrelevant. But in this point, wine and dine the prostitute, make them feel super special. Once they're in the harem, then then reality hits. Boom. Yeah. Guess what? You are just another number on this thing. And it's
you better make me some money.
Yeah, and I've always found it really, really intriguing how there are those out there who feel the need to control every little detail around them, and that includes every individual person that comes into their lives or they come in contact with. I find that really interesting.
It's sad.
It is very sad. The level of insecurity is mind-blowing, in my opinion. They're insecure.
The level of energy that takes, my God. And the other thing, too, and this is happening with Jared Leto, it happened with John of God, it's probably happened with almost every single cult leader I know, even including Brother 12, who was a local cult leader around here in the 30s. They're fixated on, there'll always be a money element where they're making money from you. Jared Leto is charging anywhere from $900 to $6,500 or different tiers just to come on his island, and that doesn't include the flights to get there. So he's making money from these people are paying for him to be their god.
It sounds very much like there was a guy, and he was from Canada. And the reason I can't think of his name, but the big tie-in to him was that blonde-haired girl that played in that Smallville series. She was the blonde-haired girl. She was caught up in that one. She was caught up in that, and they nailed her. I think even still till this day, she's still in the midst of a court battle. They're still battling that out in New York, or I don't know the whole details behind it, but I know that she was a famous actress, got caught up in this thing, and these girls were being branded with this guy's initials and
yeah, I remember that.
And he was this guy selling all this stuff and I mean he was targeting young women, and of course at the end of the day when everything got behind closed doors, it's like, hey, I'm here to do what I want with you. And many of these women by that point in time had already been broken down mentally that it's not even funny. I think it's Netflix. I think there's a special on Netflix about cults, and that's the one that that's the one that got my attention the most, because the girl that played on Smallville, she was the blonde-haired girl, and she was wrapped up in it, up at the highest levels. And
what constitutes a cult? I mean, is it just somebody they turn themselves into a deity, or like how does that work? Like when do they cross over from being like just a cool guy that people want to hang out with to a cult?
Well, I can answer that question if I can pull up the list here. I've got a list. I've written about this, so there's a criteria that in order to be a cult. I can read a few of them off if you want me to.
This is ridiculous. I just read this right here. It says a relatively small group of people having religious beliefs or practices regarded by others as strange or sinister. That's us here at the house.
Yeah. Well,
we're all strange and sinister to people.
Realistically, and not to make this anything
fair.
It's not to make this thing any religious or anything, but Christianity at one time was considered a cult. It's actually a status when you
could have been.
Yeah, well, it was because the difference between a cult status and a religion is basically the membership. And that's on a very broad level. I mean, but cults today have, as you've seen and you've investigated and you obviously, are familiar with, that cults today have a very negative tone that has been added to them. Not that I'm advocating for them and being their protector.
They've gotten a bad rap.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm not saying. No, I'm saying the word cult, not
no.
cult.
Well, because it also says here, it says. A misplaced or excessive admiration for a particular person or thing.
Yes, and that is one of those definitions of it. But, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, finish off, because I was just going to list it. Like, there's some specific things that if you cannot leave the group and come and go at your own leisure, and you have to, like, the leader will induce feelings of shame to control the members. It's an us versus them mentality. You have to alter your entire life, your personal goals to belong. You can't talk to your family, preoccupied with money. All you do is socialize with the group. There's punishment for leaving. There's a lot of times the leader's doing a lot of sexual activities with the groups, and you have to be unquestioned. You cannot question them. Utmost commitment to the leader, and mind-altering practices, things like that. You have to add that into it, and unless it has that, I mean, if you can come into a group and leave, and no one cares, and you're free to go, and they don't control you from your family, it's not a cult. So a lot of religions are cults.
It's really interesting that even though these are religions, remember what I said about membership, cults. Religion. The only difference in that status is membership levels. Because once you reach a certain level of membership, then you reach religion status. It's called a religion. It's no longer a cult. One thing.
Look at Hillsborough Baptist Church.
Thank you.
That girl. That was another crazy.
The Mormon religion started out as a cult.
Well, look, the Mormons are. I mean, look at what they say.
Yeah.
Some guy just stumbled on some tablets and
and then when you die, you get your own planet, that kind of thing.
Oh man, you're just going like, wow, that's just.
And you can't. You can't go into their holy places. I'm sorry.
It's a little funny at one time and got into the Mormon church, and I just couldn't stand it. Every time she would have them show up at the house to bless and do all this stuff, I would leave.
Or was it Jehovah's Witness?
Jehovah's Witnesses
are horrible. You need to leave this
too.
church, Grandma. Why are you a Mormon all of a sudden?
And then the Jehovah's Witnesses, man. I mean, they are so just.
So don't worry. I have an aunt that's gone through. She started out Catholic and has gone through just about all the Christian-based religions.
You know what
so
I think
okay.
she was doing?
What's
I think she's more clever than me. Because she was older, they would come and dust her house. I think she was just using them to dust her apartment because the brothers would come and do stuff for her, hoping she would give money and come to church. And I think after a while they caught on. I was suspicious. I'm like, are you using the Mormon people to dust your apartment?
A means to an end.
Swear to God.
Well, that sounds about like my grandpa.
Clever old lady.
Awesome. This is really interesting, all the work you're doing on cults and online cults, and it's amazing that there are so many of them out there. With that, let's shift gears. What else are you doing with your podcast?
Well, I do talk about the paranormal, of course, and occult, but I also do a few shows. I'll do them on my own. And I like to talk, I do love history, so I like to talk about how paranormal experiences will happen in families. And one thing that I talked about, one of my early shows, very first shows that I put out, was a concept called a forerunner. And
please explain the forerunner, please.
It's a Toyota.
It's Canadian.
All right.
It's a Toyota now. But in folklore terms, it's a Canadian term. I think it was termed by Helen Crichton, who was a Canadian folklorist. The forerunner is when you have an appearance of a ghostly figure or intangible set of events that serves as an omen or a warning of tragedy to come for an individual or an entire family.
Like a banshee.
Kind of like a banshee.
Like a banshee.
Yeah.
Or a black dog.
Or in accordance with, and this is...
No, those are very iconic and
like the
versions of it.
Yeah, like the owl for the Navajo people. In the Navajo culture, what I've been told is that the owl, the owl is a messenger. So when you have, you find yourself in one of these unique situations and this owl appears, it's a messenger. Now whether it's good or bad, don't know.
Well, Mexican culture too.
Yeah, in Mexican culture, usually, and I'm talking about Mexican culture in the northern region of Mexico, which is, along the southern border of the United States. The owl, aka in Spanish, is called lechuza, and this is supposed to be. It has negative connotations that it's supposedly a witch that changed, shape.
Well, if you see one too, though. There are some
areas believe that it's basically
it's a portent of death.
Mm-hmm. It's going to happen to you or someone in your family.
Yeah, and they say death comes in threes.
Yes, that. So please continue. I'm sorry we interrupted.
It's okay. It's perfectly awesome. What I did was I had a story from somebody from the east coast of Canada, and they were telling me about it was her experience was very different than a black dog. She told me an experience that happened, and I'm trying to sort of paraphrase this because I actually wrote it in an article at the time, so I'll try to paraphrase it as well as I can. But it was way back in 1955 when she was a young girl. She was she's a senior citizen at the time. And the year before, she had a brother who, her mother had died when she was 3 or 4, and she always had to pretend this brother, who was a newborn at the time, was not her brother because they gave her brother to one of the family members to raise as their own. So she always had to pretend they weren't related to him. And the year before she had this experience, he went missing out on a boat in the ocean, and his body was never recovered. And so it was a year later, and her father had that whole year been walking up and down the beach looking for the body of his son. Yeah, and he'd been looking for this body, and he too had never told the boy that he was the father. He let the other relatives raise them as his, but he every day walked up and down the shore to see if anything would happen. And so it was a year later, and this lady who's telling the story was at her aunt's house, and the aunt was the relative who had taken her brother as her own. So she was at her house, and her aunt was teaching her about tarot cards and stuff, and they were having tea. And suddenly they looked out the window, and she seen her father coming up the walkway, and they heard him walking up the walkway towards the house. and they thought that was strange because they thought he was working in the city. In those days, they didn't have vehicles necessarily all the time. They walked a lot of places in the cities. So not everybody had a car, believe it or not, back in 1955. And so she got up and she went to go open the door as she heard her father come up on the staircase. And she opened the door to find that no one was there. And she was really confused, and she turned around, and her aunt, who was a tarot card reader and supposed psychic, said, "We just had a forerunner." And this woman was like, "What is that? What's a forerunner?" And the aunt said, "We just had a visitation. Somebody in the family is going to die." So this lady probably wasn't really convinced. That she thought, well, maybe my father was here and we just got confused and he left. But she asked him later and he said, no, I was working all day long. I wasn't there. So she was a little bit like just brushed it off. But the aunt was convinced that somebody in the family was going to die, they were seeing the ghost of him, and she thought it might even be her father. And so this lady just poo-pooed it off and ignored the whole scenario. And then I think it was about a couple of weeks later, her father had come home from the pub, and he went out to the yard to go deal. They had a little mare or pony outside, and he went to go deal with the pony. I don't know if he was bringing it out of the field into the stables. And however it happened, the pony started to act up, and it reared its head, and it struck out at him. And when it struck him, it knocked him in the head and knocked him over. And because he was a little bit tipsy from being at the pub. And so he just, got up, brushed it off, put the pony, mare, whatever, into its stall, and then went back to the house and thought nothing of it, and everybody thought everything was okay. And then it was within a couple of days he passed out, and they took him to the hospital, and he had an aneurysm. It had done a blood clot in his head, and they tried to reduce the swelling. It was bleeding in the brain from being knocked, and they hadn't realized it. And of course, in those days, the hospitals didn't have the same technology they did, so they were unable to reduce the swelling, and he eventually died. But then she added, he died on the very same day that her brother drowned and went missing the year before. So, and 2 weeks later, his own self showed up to the family, she said, to warn them that he was going to die. And when it happened, her aunt said, "I told you someone was going to die." And that was the story.
That's really interesting.
And it was different because he showed up as his own forerunner, and it was very much tied to the family, and there was all these synchronicities. And she said she never forgot that she was born on the same day as her father and the son died on the same day. So she just was always adamant that she saw her father walking, and he was telling her that he was going to die soon, but yet he didn't know it.
Wow, it sounds like one of those experiences where people, and of course, Wolf has, if you've ever listened to any of our podcasts, we discuss, mainly him, I'm just listening. He discusses the time he lived in the haunted house, and many of the guys that lived there that for an extended time, because most of the guys that are involved in the story or are in his inner circle, lived there for long periods of times, off and on, over the 10-year course that they lived there. Well, a few of them, I'd say at least 3 or 4 of the guys claim to have seen a doppelganger of Wolf, and so I think that's really interesting. I would not rule it out, because it's just too much out there that is unexplained, too many things that happened. I think it's amazing. Now, another thing on Folklore, I guess related to it, is have you, do you cover stuff over the little people, the fae folk, the fairy folk?
Certainly. I mean, I haven't yet on this podcast, but I have before in previous podcasts.
So what is your take on that? What is your take on the fairy folk? I think it's fascinating to me.
I did an interview with someone and I had to remove it because they were very controlling over the editing. They I removed it off of the show because they wanted me to change too many things and I didn't want to hack it apart, so I just removed it. But they were basically on and they were talking about how fairy sightings are still actually quite common. And a lot of people think they might be UFOs. I'm not so sure. She was convinced that fairies are more earthbound. They're not space
aliens
stuff. So yeah, they're not like they're saying that like the fairies are more earthbound and they're not like some outer space aliens, and that it's very much obviously tied to Irish folklore, but I'm sure that has transferred to America. I'm not, I'm not really well read on fairies, but she was intimating that people are still having these experiences and too afraid to tell anyone about it and having terrifying. I mean, people always think fairies are very
the whole Tinkerbell thing, like Disney, right?
Yeah, and even today, I've interviewed people who believe that they are like that, and I'm like, well, no, that's actually they can be quite frightening and scary, and they can do some pretty terrible things, and they're supposed to kidnap children and switch them with little changeling babies and give you their bad fairy baby and steal your child and all sorts of strange, terrible things. Now, I think in some instances, fairies might have been used to explain why a child had a disability and they were switched out. But I don't doubt that some people are actually having some sort of earthbound, weird experience. And I don't know exactly how to explain it because you would think they were hallucinating, but there's cases of, double witnesses and whatnot. I don't exactly know what they are. I don't know if I entirely believe that they're aliens. So, are they're like a modern, or they're like what modern day it's aliens, and before it was fairies. I think they could be like you could see
one in the same.
We've just changed. They could be one in the same because they're changing along with our perceptions and our expectations. Perhaps that's true, but there are still people who are experiencing fairies as was hundreds of years ago. They may not always be here. Like these things, we might not see them. They might not actually they might come in and out of our reality.
Oh, you're talking about interdimensionality? Being interdimensional?
It could be. I mean, it's either that or we're projecting something, and it has to do with how we see things, and that's why they change over time, is because we're interacting with whatever's there, and they're just showing us what we want to see.
That's true. That's interesting. That's an interesting perspective. And then and I could understand why because of your statement right there, I could understand why some people would say, oh, they're aliens. Well, when you think of space aliens, you think of high technology, you think of spaceships, you think all this stuff, right? What if they're putting on a hologram for you?
They're interdimensional too, though. They can be aliens in that way. So have you ever heard of the red caps?
I have not.
Yeah, we actually have down here in Austin, there are legends of these little diminutive folk that live within the walls of these really old
buildings.
Yeah, some of the buildings downtown are 150, 200 years old. Wow. And so within those thick walls, people claim,
but they're brick and mortar buildings, right?
Brick and mortar, yeah. And then there's underground. There's a whole tunnel system underground. People claim to see these little. They wear little red caps, and I told a story on one of those shows that we did of a bartender friend of mine. She saw one carrying an ice cube.
I think it's phenomenal. I mean, that when he, after we finished with that show, so on and so forth, and thinking about it, and we discussed it. I thought it was really crazy, the little thing running off with an ice cube.
Yeah, and then the one that stuck a rat or something with a little, sword or whatever. It was weird. I mean, and I feel that some of these stories back when I was, because for me, I've always been into the paranormal, and when I was a younger guy, it was no different. I would talk to people, and then they would tell me if there was a weird story. They'd tell me, "Hey, this person has a story." So when I was working down there, I started collecting stories, a lot of ghost stories, a lot of weird, paranormal stuff. And then there were these stories of these little diminutive beings. And I started getting more reports. And over working down there for about 10 years, I fielded a lot of reports about these beings. And sometimes I would ask club owners and managers if anything weird ever happened. And a lot of it, they would just be very open about the ghost stuff. But then they wouldn't always say anything about the little guys until I brought it up. And I got a couple other stories about that I'm going to do on a later show. But yeah, there are definitely some really weird stories. And for the most part, they're kind of innocuous. I guess that's the word. They don't really, but then
they kind of mind their own, keep to themselves.
Yeah, they're not really a problem. But then there were a couple stories that I got where somebody who had gone to sleep and they woke up with one of these things biting their arm. I guess because and it's so funny. I'm not laughing.
They weren't having sleep paralysis or anything. They were like wide awake.
The guys, and I could use his name. The guy's Kevin. He's a friend of mine, but he was laying on a couch or whatever, and he claimed that he had fallen asleep, and because he had been drinking, and he crashed at the bar because he was one of he was the head of security or whatever. And so the owner and the manager are good friends with him, and I know them too, and this was years ago. But he fell asleep, and he woke up with something like a gnawing pain on his arm, and there was this little diminutive creature under his arm, and I think maybe because he had laid on it, and it bit his arm, and he had this little small bite mark that he was showing us. Well, Squid, this is a guy who works downtown, that Mondo was saying, oh, it looks like a spider bite or something. The guy was showing me and Diablo and Squid. But I actually think that he might be right, because if you look at it closely, it looks like little bitty teeth. And I'm like, what is that? But no, everybody else just kind of dismissed it, because nobody's down there to hear about that stuff. They're down there to party and drink and have a good time. There's 400 bars and clubs down there. It's got more concentration of bars and clubs than any place in North America. So, yeah. So nobody's down there for that, but me, and I'm over there listening to him, and he's like, well, don't believe me, and the guy was he's a big tough guy, and nobody really, took him seriously. But I had already heard, at least at that point, probably 3 or 4 other stories about these, and there's not many people that are going around collecting these threads. Well, I did, and I ended up hearing stories of these diminutive little people that would run in and out of the walls.
That's very bizarre. I've never heard of little red cap, little fairy dudes before.
Well, I think that they're different than the fairies. I actually have
kind of like the difference between elves and dwarves, maybe something like that.
No, it's like another category.
It is. I'll tell you a story. I got 3 or 4 fairy stories. I'm not going to get into it here because we're going to do a show about it, but I'll give you one. I'll give you one story, and then you can tell me what you think of this one. When I was 15, I was in a reformatory. Let's put it that way. I had some issues when I was a young guy, and I was a cut up. I was always getting into fights and stuff. So they put me in a timeout, so to speak. And so I ended up, I was being escorted by 2 guards from one unit to the next because I was being transferred or whatever. And I don't remember what was going on. We were talking and kind of joking, and they didn't have me in cuffs or anything like that. I was considered a pretty good, whatever kid or whatever. So they didn't really mess with me. So they were taking me, just walking. We were walking casually. These 2 guys, they knew me pretty well, and I wasn't a flight risk or anything. So as we were walking, one of them looks up and says, "What the heck was that?" And all I saw was something in the corner of my eye. I can't even tell you what it really was. It just looked like a yellow light or something. But the guy that I was with, and I think he was actually a college-age kid at that time, and I was, like I said, 15, he claims that it looked like a little small person, glowing yellow, really brightly yellow. All I saw was what I thought was a yellow, almost like a little mini comet. Like it just gone around a lamppost and disappeared because I saw it in the corner of my eye, and I looked and I just saw it streaking away, and he was just standing there. And as I continued to walk, he just stood there. And of course, he's in charge of me. He's supposed to be watching me, and I turn around, and they're both just literally, the other guy's looking at him, and he's going like, and he's like asking him, "Did you see that?" And they were both kind of going like, "Yeah." Well, I just saw it like in the corner of my eye because I was on the far side of them, I guess, and they both claimed to have seen this. And when they described it, and then of course they told me, they're like, "Look, don't tell anybody that we said we saw that," because the facility that I was at was surrounded by woods. It was in deep woods. There were woods all the way around that place. So it was just surrounded by woods. There was a fence, and then there was just woods all the way around it, like real thick woods. And so I went to, when I got my new roommate, because we weren't in cells or anything. We had rooms. There was a guy that it was my roommate or whatever, bunkmate, whatever. Over the, and we had a window that we could look out of. It was like a secured glass window. It wasn't a regular window. But he claimed after I told him what had happened, and I told him that there were the two guards, that what they had seen. He claimed that he would see that same thing happen. He would see them dancing around in the field, in the open field where we would play kickball, football, soccer, whatever, with a bunch of trees around the edges of it that butted up into the building. He said he would see them like swooping around in the field, like these 2 or 3 lights. And he said that one time, and this is what the guy told me, that it came up to the window and it looked just like a little man. So, but he said that it had like a grasshopper-like body with almost like a tail. And he said it had wings, but it had like a human head and human little arms and legs. Now, I would have thought this kid was just off his rocker if those 2 guys that I was with that night hadn't seen. Now, the first unit I was on, there was no view like that. But when they moved me from that unit to the other unit, that's where you had the view of the field and whatever.
You were living large.
Well, maybe that's why I saw, when we were walking, like I just saw the trail of it, but these other 2 guards, they saw it.
They got a good look at it.
It freaked them out, man. And every time they, so here's what happened. Years later, I go on to live my life. I get out and I straighten my life up. I'm no longer a wayward youth. I'm an upstanding citizen. Yeah, that's bullcrap. But anyway, I end up going and yeah, I still was kind of doing stuff, but wasn't getting caught. But anyway, I was working at a nightclub, and I was running, and then I ended up running that nightclub for several years. Well, one of those guys that I worked with, and he's a really good guy. It was a hip hop club. Well, he would come in there, and I saw him there one day. Now he's probably only like 7, 8 years older than me, so I recognized him and I started talking to him, and I was like, "Do you remember me?" And I said his name. I'm not gonna say his name on the air because I don't know what he's doing now, where he's at, but he was in a career as a correction officer, so maybe he's probably
He's probably retired by now. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't want to. No, he's not that much older than me, so I don't want to say his name. That's just in case. But anyway, I went up to him and I said, "Hey, man, you remember me?" And he saw me. He looked at me. He goes, "Oh, what's up, man?" And it had been several years since I'd seen him, and so he became a regular at the club. He started coming in there. I'd always let him in for free and let him and his wife drink. Well, one day I started talking to his wife as he was at the bar, because they became regulars. And I mentioned that we had a weird experience one time, and it came up because she was talking about the club, because something weird had happened to her up in the bathroom, which I always believed that bathroom was haunted, the female bathroom, because I'd gone in there one time and something weird had happened. I'll get into that one day, but anyways, she mentioned something about it, so obviously she was open to the paranormal, and I was like, well, I was about to say his name. He had an experience one time, and she's like, she thought I was talking about ghosts, at the place he used to work at, because there were rumors that one of the units was haunted. And I was like, no, I wouldn't call it a ghost. And then she goes, oh, you're talking about the little elf he saw. So he had told her, it had come up, and he had told her. Now, there was another guy who's still a good friend of mine who I hang out with sometimes or whatever, and he owns a little place up here down the street. Now, me and him were actually in 3 different facilities together when we were kids. When I mentioned it to him one day, we were talking about it. He said that he claimed that he had seen these same things when they were walking down a trail, a path to go from one spot to the next with 3 other guys.
At that particular facility.
Yeah, at that same place. And that he claims to have seen something zip around the trees real fast, but it was almost the size of a fist. And that would have been bigger.
Yes.
And I was like, what are you seeing? What are these people seeing? And like I said, I only saw it in the corner of my eye. You know, I've never seen it full on, but it is something. I mean, there's something to it. I don't know what that is.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely something.
So what do you think of that, Melissa? I mean,
I've never heard of any such thing. However, it's quite bizarre. I always wonder, because there's so many different sightings. I always wonder if there's some kind of field, and they're interacting with us, and it's and there's something there, and it's like, oh, what should I be? Oh, I'll be whatever that person is.
Whatever they have on their mind.
I think it has to do with the person, and I'm not saying it's not real or something is happening. There's something there, but it's almost like it will take on the shape of something that it can read within you, or that you're expecting. My former podcast partner, he spent a night in Avebury, in England. There's stone circles, and there's a pub in the middle of a circle, and he spent the night in there, and it was like a horrific night. And that place was actually featured on Most Haunted, the pub. And he was in there, and he said when he started to see shapes and figures suddenly show up in the bedroom, he was like, they were showing up like a monk figure, like almost like a druid priest. But then when he kind of looked at it, like, really, a druid priest? It started to change into like a more womanly, like Edwardian with a cap on. And so when he started questioning it, he said it was a really bizarre thing. It started to switch.
It would adjust
shapes.
as he was questioning. So
yeah,
it would adjust.
It started to shift into something else. And he said, and then there's other people there, they all had experience, but some people seen a snake appear or something like this. And he said, I think it's reading our minds, or changing into something that it expects that we want it to change into. And a lot of times we all see them as the same thing, because it's almost like we have like a collective of expectations as a culture. And then every once in a while it's, you know, like to show up as a druid in a stone circle. Well, yeah.
You look at the location, look where you're at, look at the history around there. So people are walking around with that on their mind, that kind of thing.
And everybody has all these different sightings. Like you have like the guy with the grasshopper, the human heads, and there's similarities, but there's variations. And I'm just wondering if something in the field's not reacting. And the reason there's variance is because little things are changing about it, because it's reading the person.
What about,
that's a possibility.
What about,
it's a good possibility,
because you hear stories of will-o-wisps or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, and they're always in these fields running around playing. Like, what if there is like these orbs? They're just orbs, just balls of light, and they're just giving human features to themselves.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But what's weird though is that everybody described the entity as the same thing. What the guards claim that they saw, and I talked to that guy years later at the club when he came to the club. And he actually told that story, and he told the story in front of my brother and in front of a couple other bouncers that worked for me that are still friends of mine now to this day. They've heard the story. And they also heard the thread from the other guy who's our friend that was locked up with me at the same place at that time. What's weird is, now, when you hear these threads, okay, these whatever.
These stories that are threads.
These stories that were,
with the common thread.
The common thread, yeah. They were all described as the same thing. Like the guard that became a regular patron at our club. Now the other guy, I never saw him again after I left, but he was a pretty cool dude, but I never talked to him. But the other guy, he told me, he's like, the way he described it was the same way that my bunkmate had described to me what he was seeing out the window. Now, I spent many nights looking out the window, and
after he told you?
Yeah, and I never saw a darn thing.
Wow.
But he did describe it to me one day, and because I told him, I said, when we were coming over here, we saw this weird-looking light. Like, it was like an oversized lightning bug. And before I even finished the sentence, that's when he started telling me, and it has like a human head, and it has like a weird grasshopper body with arms and legs. Yeah, I saw it. They play outside. And I'm just like, whoa, I didn't say all that, because I didn't really see. All I saw was like a little, like a zip real quick, So yeah, I don't know what that was. I don't know what to make of that, but it's very odd. It's a very odd thing. And one day I will do a show where because since, those incidents, I've gotten a few stories about people. One guy in South Texas actually had sent me a story about something very similar. He would see them periodically.
Oh, that's interesting.
And then his little brother started seeing them. I don't know.
Well, a lot of times with even aliens, it seems that families have experiences collectively too. Like, they'll have it over generations as well, where all the generations will have. And I'm wondering if it's the same for fairy sightings and paranormal things, if there's some sort of trend within certain families and generations that people will continue to experience these things as well.
Well, to answer or comment on what you said about aliens and families and family members being abducted generationally, et cetera. Well, first you think about aliens. Number one, first thing associated with aliens, you think of super high technology. So if they have this super high technology, it's not too far-fetched to think or to assume that, they think they're better than us and we're nothing more than cattle. So if you've got a cow, it's had a calf. The farmer on any farm can tell you, hey, this is the old cow that I have, and it's given birth to this, and this other, these cattle that are on my farm, et cetera, et cetera. So, going in there to check them out, they know their stuff.
Children.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So when it comes to that, yeah. Now, as far as the aliens being able to do that, it's no surprise to me. They got the high technology, so yeah. Now the fae folk, the fairies, or forest families and come in to visit, I would venture to guess that if a family stays in their area, it doesn't seem far fetched that they would come and interact with the follow on generation from the people that they first interacted with, the mother and then the daughter or son and so on and so forth. If they stay in that area, I don't think it's far-fetched at all.
I've also heard of families having, and even entire towns, like there's a town in Newfoundland that have experience with hags or shadows, attachments, or entire families are affected by them over different generations. Like an attachment follows, and they call it a dark, shadowy figure. I've heard of that as well. So it's something's affecting multiple consciousness. It's not just not everybody. It's just a one-time experience. It seems almost like it spreads, or it's not contained to one person often. Right. And that's not just with aliens or fairies. You get entire villages affected by the hag or the shadow.
That's really interesting. I've never really delved into I guess you could say an attachment of an entity to a multiple people or a large group of people, such as a town. I've never delved into really investigating that, but it sounds very interesting. So, what other things do you find yourself investigating and putting on your podcast?
Oh gosh, we were just talking about in terms of the occult. I often have a continuing guest on, Gary Parsons, and we talk a lot about Thelema or occult themes in films, and we just were talking about Aleister Crowley and different locations that he did his magic at and how his magic affected things and how it affected culture. So we'll often talk about those kind of concepts about Thelema. I'm not a Thelemic practitioner, but he often comes on and we talk about that, because I never realized before I started interviewing him how much Aleister Crowley has affected modern culture.
Yeah. Oh yes, he has impacted, because for lack of better words, I guess, paraphrasing, he definitely pushed the idea, within he pushed the philosophy or lived it or practiced the philosophy that he was going to will what he wanted into existence. and of course the magic and all this other stuff. So it's been really interesting. And of course, Anton LaVey is another guy that, in the same,
Yes.
line as Crowley. But Crowley was quite the interesting fellow. He had a penchant for redheads, not fake redheads, true redheads.
Oh.
Oh yeah, that's one of the things that always stuck to me. I've never studied Aleister Crowley deeply, and very intensively, and so unfortunately, the few tidbits that I have heard about him is that one thing is that he truly had a penchant for redheads. It's something he believed there was something really special about redheads. And, amongst other things. Yeah. And amongst other things. And there's amongst other things that, of course, he had ties to a lot of the elite circles, in society here in America, in the United States and quite possibly Canada. It's hard to tell. But, we could talk about that after the show, once we're off air. And I can explain all that to you. But it's really interesting, his I guess you could say his magic and his philosophy that he pushed was definitely.
Well, one of the things that I read, you can actually find this easily online, is he was very interested in the Ouija board. He really liked the idea of the Ouija board. And in fact, he was trying to design his own version of the Ouija board to sell. And he had contacted people about this, but he had written up ideas and plans for it. They're since lost, but it never happened. But he considered it, and I've never had a Ouija board work for me, but I've heard all sorts of stories from other people. But he insisted it was a really good divination tool, and he didn't mean it in the way of contacting the devil or Satan. A lot of people
demons, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no. Yeah, he. I mean, if you really look at it, Aleister Crowley is quite responsible for the fact that people do yoga and meditation today. Right. Very simple processes like that. And people always think that do what thou wilt means do whatever you want. And it's actually much more, it's so different than that. It is, you have a life goal, a destiny, something that you're meant to do on this earth. And it's different for everyone. Do what thou will is referring to that. And oftentimes it's a lot of discipline. People, Aleister Crowley, he's got this reputation because he's kind of narcissistic. He loved to play with people writing stuff about him, and people would talk about him sacrificing babies, and because of some of the quotes where he joked about sacrificing babies, he was actually, sorry everybody, he was talking about masturbation, sacrificing. That whole joke, every sperm is sacred. That's what he was talking about. And people totally misinterpret that he was some baby sacrificer. And he was actually really a sarcastic, humorous, tongue-in-cheek kind of guy. And it didn't bother him that people said bad stuff about him because it put him in the press.
Right. He was capitalizing on whether negative or positive press. He was capitalizing. It's interesting, but it's not surprising.
Let me ask you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No,
you go ahead.
So, what made you come up with the name Secret Door?
I don't know. It just, I ended really quickly my podcast with the other thing, and someone had contacted me about coming on their show, and because I was going to start a new one, and they said, "Do you want to come on my show?" And I said, "Sure, I'll come on and talk about my new podcast." And I had nothing, and I within 3 or 4 days, it just popped in my head. I was like, okay, secret door, like it's like the doorway to different secrets and things that we don't normally talk about in real life. This is sort of like opening the door to that, or opening the door and looking at particular experiences that you had that maybe was, really about everything just came together at this one time and you had these experiences, or whether it was with your ritual or a paranormal experiences, and it's almost like you opened a secret door kind of thing. To have that, and it just popped in my head, and all the design I did it up very, very quickly. It'll probably change again because I'm a designer, so I'll probably change the look of the website 20 times from now.
That's all right though. That's okay. Mm-hmm. You mentioned it just popped into your head, and of course the secret door. It reminds me, or brings to mind, the the secret weird door that you were telling me about there, Wolf, in between at that house. That was that one little room area that's what I keep thinking. But that was quite this little room in this house that Wolf can explain it better, but that's what it reminds me of.
Yeah, it was actually, I don't want to call it an investigation because it was just some friends of ours. She had a house, and when we were partying and hanging out back in the club days or whatever, they lived in this little, and I'm going to get into that on a show, on another episode later down the road or whatever, but there's a house that they had a weird, like a closet, and the closet went all the way through to another closet and to another bedroom. Like the closets were connected, but in the middle of the closet there was like a little small door. And
that's what I think. That's what I'm thinking.
It was really bizarre. And the little girl was complaining about a little diminutive creature that would come out of that door. But the door just went from one closet to the next. You know, it was just weird. It was the way the house was built was weird. And I told my friend, I was like, "You have a weird house." House was just built weird.
Yes, Melissa. So your secret door, when I first heard the name, that's the first thing that popped into my head. That right there, that what Wolf explained. He explains it so much better. I just see the image after the first time I heard him tell that. This whole image and scenario built into, just popped into my head. And so that's your secret door. There it is.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that eventually too. I mean, there's so much stuff that I think perception is a lot of it too. I mean,
yeah. Well, there's that one incident that you discussed, that one incident that you discussed, right, about Lake Travis, the guy that was he was the guard or he was the maintenance guy out at the docks.
Oh, you're talking about the wolf man or whatever.
Yeah, but the whole point of it that's really catchy is the report was how he was watching it transform. Yeah, you care to quickly run over that real Wolf, so she can understand the context that we're getting at?
Okay, there was a story that was given to me. Do you want me to tell the whole story? Because I've told.
Well, just give it the abridged version, because folks can listen to it on the.
They can listen to it on a former episode that we did.
Previous episode
about werewolves. There was a guy that worked out at the lake. Guy was a pest control.
Yeah, that's what he was doing.
Yeah, and there was a guard that was out there that let him get onto the boats to do the pest control for the boats, because the boats have been sitting out for a while, and so spiders and things because people don't use them as much in the off season. So in the spring, they when they start getting really ready to use them, the people will take pest control or whatever. And while they were out there on the dock, actually on a pier, they were out there walking on a pier that was next to the dock or whatever. They see this thing swimming across the lake. Once it got closer, then it looked like a wolf. And then as it got up to the shore, it was actually,
it was walking on two legs as it's exiting the water, and it was shimmering and
shedding, and all the hair fell out of it until it became like just a man with long hair, like a human.
Yeah.
Wow.
Buck naked. So, but then, and it going back to the whole thing we were mentioning, perception is.
But what happens though when you get these weird things that happen, like on these trail cams?
Yeah, I mean,
like the video of that creature. There's a video, a very infamous video, that only some people have seen. Certain people have seen, and it very clearly looks like a werewolf on the video. I mean, it's a trail cam, you can tell. But then there's also there's
the famous one, the Pennsylvania white Bigfoot. That was they caught it on film. They caught it on film, and that one is. I mean, how is that perception?
I don't understand, because like sometimes I think these things could have the trickster element to them, like what you're saying, Melissa, where they appear to you to be whatever you want them to be.
Yes,
but then they must have favorite shapes, because there's
a default shape, if you will.
Yeah, maybe it's like it. Yeah. He likes to be a clown.
Yeah.
What's crazy?
Pennywise.
Well, what's crazy? And I'll tell you another one. Here's another one. We have these gargoyle looking, and I'm the one that calls them gargoyles. Nobody has ever given me a story and said it was a gargoyle. They just said that they saw this flying creature with gray stone graphite colored skin or whatever, and so different parts of the country. And one was in Ohio and one was in New Mexico. Now, it doesn't get much different than that. That's completely different terrain, completely different parts of the country.
Yes.
And they both described the same creature. These families had never met each other. They don't know each other. They had nothing to do with each other. But they did get attacked by something, a flying, and we talk about that in one of the episodes too, one of the earlier episodes.
And by all intents and purposes, after description is given, it
looked like a gargoyle.
Yeah,
that's the only thing you could describe it as. It had a bulldog type head with bat-like wings. And what was even more specific was each one of these two creatures had like a broken chain around its neck.
Yes.
And you're wondering, is that the same creature? Like maybe it was the same creature. Like maybe it just flew across the country. Because it was like, the sightings, if I remember correctly, you can go back and listen to the show because, I have the details in front of me when I'm doing the show, but I believe that it was like they were 20 years apart or something like that.
Yeah, they were not one happened 1 week and the other happened 2 weeks later or something.
No, and it wasn't like a flap in that area. I don't believe that it was just a fluke, And then, but you get stories of the Goat Man, and in Maryland.
Yeah.
It's a very common thing. You get the Goat Man around these particular roads.
Yes.
And, a friend of ours that I knew from years ago claimed that he saw one when he was a kid. And I talk about that episode 1. But
right. And, speaking of the Goat Man, I'm sorry. Melissa, everyone, you think of the Goat Man, you would naturally think we were just talking about the occult. You'd think Baphomet.
Yeah.
And so, what is your take on that?
Well, whenever I hear goat, I do tend to think pagan, but I also think, okay, people are seeing these. It's tied out into the environment. Maybe they're near farmland. Maybe they're closely connected to goats. So maybe there's something there about the surroundings or where they are or what they know that's linked into seeing these goat men. It does say not necessarily to me Baphomet or Satan. It's like nature, pagan, goats.
The satyr.
Yeah, the satyr. It's like a half man, half goat. Like goats were also like you always hear people talk about sacrificing goats, and so it can get a little creepy occult feeling when you see if a man's got a goat head on. I'm like, did he put it on, or is it really a goat, or is it somebody doing some strange activities? Like, so all sorts of things pop into my head, and of course I do think witchcraft, but more rooted in paganism and tied to the animals in the land, and I've never really gotten into or read anything about goat men or dog men or anything like that. There's really no mythology locally where I am. It's mostly Sasquatch.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's what we've heard too, because Wolf over here, he had his own dogman encounter. He saw one up pretty close, in the flesh in all its glory. And he said,
yep, when I was 15.
Yeah. And he says, I'm not afraid of any man. I'll throw down, with any man. I ain't afraid of them. He said, but to throw down with that thing, he says, you can take that one home.
There's no way,
There's
dude.
no way.
It was 7.5 feet tall.
Yeah. I'm really surrounded by, I live on Vancouver Island. It's known as Ape Island because of the Sasquatch sightings. But I'm also surrounded by cougars, wolves, and bears.
Yeah.
I'm actually quite concerned about cougars, to be quite honest.
They're around here too.
Yeah.
We got cougars down here. The one thing we really don't have is bears and wolves.
Well, there are black bears down in South Texas, not up here.
Well, actually,
the
very
island
few.
only has black bears. We only have black bears.
Okay.
The grizzlies didn't make it over here, thankfully.
Yeah, they're big.
Yeah, they're big. They're on the mainland.
It's a beautiful area where you live.
It is.
Yeah, it is really nice. I don't know if people, I think there could be real sightings. Like, I'm not saying that you didn't see that, but I also think there could be misidentifications, because if somebody doesn't know what a bear's like, running across the road. I mean, and if they're a city person, they've never seen a bear running around. They could get confused. It could be misidentification, or it could be something that someone's really actually experiencing, and it's unexplainable. Now, like, you go to England and they're having Sasquatch sightings and strange sightings there. There's no way there's Sasquatch there. And
Why
there's no
not?
way these people are lying. There's no woods. There's no physical place where it could hide.
Sherwood
so what's
Forest.
happening there? What's that?
Sherwood Forest.
There's no forest left. It's like you couldn't hide anything in there. They're so deforested now. There's nothing really that big enough. I mean, for something that big to hide. So is it really? Does that mean it doesn't exist? No, that means something else is going on there.